say the main takeaway from the report was in relation to your sector?
So the main takeaway from the point of the education provider sector or the FE sector was that there's no one-size-fits-all solution, and the STEM skills gaps aren't a national problem. I think education providers need to thoroughly understand the local region that they serve and then know specifically what skills gaps their local employers have in regards to STEM occupations.
Primarily that there is a lot of data available to the higher education sector now that can underpin key strategic decision making and ensuring that there's a robust evidence base for decisions being taken by planners and strategic decision makers within higher education providers. So, for example, it's understanding what the STEM skill shortages are at a local level, where those skill shortages are in different industries, and it's not the same across the country. There's a lot of difference between different regions in terms of the skills, the industries, the occupations, and that data is now available and is critical for higher education institutions to understand.
I think for our customers that work in the economic development world, the main takeaway will be, although they recognise that STEM skills are critical nationally, they'll be particularly interested in the fact that the report starts to show how there is that disparity and how there will be certain areas which will naturally be stronger and have a comparative advantage when it comes to the industries that are requiring those skills. I think the main takeaway will be that it reinforces that desire they have to really understand their local economy and the importance of being able to understand that demand for STEM skills at a local level.
One of the things that the report does is to back up what we've been hearing from the past few years about the increased demand in STEM jobs, growth in such jobs being 20% from 2003 to 17, compared with 15.5% in non-STEM jobs. This is also set to continue into the future with 3% or so growth in STEM jobs versus 2.5% for non-STEM. What do you think this means for your sector?
So there's a clear demand for future STEM skills and occupations, which are not only vital to the UK economy, but also to local economic growth. So further education providers are responsible for offering the learners they serve a wide range of options that lead them to sustainable career paths, but also contribute to the local and national skills agenda, whether this be within STEM or non-STEM occupations.
Well, for the HE sector, it's clear that jobs in STEM are not going away, that investing in STEM education is investing in the workforce of the future, and that there, certainly on the employer side, there's going to be demand for this for the foreseeable future. So it makes for a good investment for a university. But the question is, of course, where within STEM should that investment be? And what we can see from this data is that you need to understand your local labour market and your local industries in order to answer that and make the right investment decisions.
For local authorities and local enterprise partnerships, they will often play a very strategic role in terms of bringing stakeholders together. I think this increased demand for STEM jobs is something that they all want to tap into in terms of how they work with the skills providers, be it further education or higher education, to ensure that there's a throughput of people with the skills that are needed to meet that demand in terms of jobs.
The report clearly shows that demand for STEM skills is not at all uniform across the country. Lots of variations in the number of people needed to fill roles and the types of roles that are needed in different locations. What does this mean for the sectors that you're supporting, and how should they respond to the challenge of STEM skills?
So the skills requirements for STEM occupations or STEM-related occupations will be very different from one region compared to another. So labour market data is needed to help education providers unpick those specific skills requirements. and then from that plan and amend their curriculum accordingly.
What universities need to know is, where are the STEM jobs now? Where is the growth in those STEM jobs? And what type of jobs, what type of roles are being recruited? And the answers to those questions are not the same, and they differ across the country, and they differ according to industry. And it's really important that universities understand the data behind all of that, so the planners, the decision makers can make evidence-based judgments.
Through understanding the variations at a local level and understanding what the demand is, local enterprise partnerships and local authorities will be best placed to ensure that they target the resource and the capacity that they have to put in place interventions that are going to support the development of the skills that are needed, and also being able to maximise the opportunities for local residents.
Our comparison of two of the biggest STEM employing industries, digital and oil and gas, shows that such can often have very different staffing needs. What do you think this means for your sector in terms of the way they go about tackling the STEM skills needs in their area, especially in terms of how they engage with employers?
So identifying staffing patterns with labour market data can help education providers understand the range of industries that the STEM occupations lead into, and then in turn help them engage with employers in all industries where STEM skills are needed. This will help fill skills gaps, as well as helping learners progress into meaningful employment after study.
Well, the obvious way, of course, is for universities to use that data to look at their course portfolios, look at what their current offer is, how that maps against what their regional economy is demanding, but also it allows them perhaps to be more creative with their product mix. So in terms of looking at short courses, executive education, CPD, and understanding in those local areas from which they would recruit for those types of programs, what the demand actually is. And not only to help with getting new employees into the industries, but also helping to upskill the existing workforce so that they can also help fill the skills gap.
I think the key factor is that through understanding the difference in terms of industry demand, it's then possible to have really informed conversations with employers. Local enterprise partnerships and local authorities are well placed to have very meaningful conversations with industry, but they need to be coming to those conversations with a solid evidence base and demonstrating an understanding of what's important to those employers.
How do you think better knowledge and understanding of STEM salaries can be used by organisations in your sector to help fix STEM shortages?
So generally STEM occupations are well paid, but as skills requirements differ from region to region, we've seen that also so do wages. What labour market data helps us do is look at wage information and show which STEM occupations are well paid, which are not, but also gives local wage data, not national wage data on STEM occupations, which generally is misleading and unhelpful. So within the FE sector, by knowing which STEM occupations have a competitive advantage within a region, an education provider can make sure learners, colleagues and employers are aware of this, and then they can effectively offer the right training and employer links to make sure that there's a really strong talent pipeline for these occupations.
Well, how do universities inform their current students now as to what the potential salaries are that their graduates can earn? Where does that information come from? How up to date is it? Is it localized? Because the earnings across the country in different areas, in different industries for these STEM occupations vary quite considerably. And when you look at Delhi returns and you see that the majority of students do stay in the region in which they study, then actually understanding some of the complexities of that data is going to be very, very useful to the students in terms of their decision making, and it will also guide the university in what narrative to be taking to their students and prospective students.
I think this provides a great opportunity for organisations such as LEPS to really promote the opportunities within the STEM sector. So to be able to highlight the type of opportunities, the type of salary that could be available, and then to ensure that the skills supply side is responding to that. It plays into that strategic role that I've talked about, and it should provide a real opportunity to ensure that local residents are maximising the opportunities that could be available to them.
In the focus on skills section, we've shown how the hard skills that employers are looking for can be identified. How do you think this sort of insight can be used in your sector?
So by identifying which hard STEM skills occupations require, the FE sector can ensure the content of the curriculum in these areas is meaningful and relevant, and also meets local employee needs.
Well, in HE, this is hugely important. You have a very rapidly changing labour market, very rapidly changing sets of skills that are in demand. How rapidly are modules being updated to reflect that? And I don't just mean being updated, but actually reflecting what is in demand in the labour market. Now, of course, you can't ensure that someone's degree is still going to be absolutely 100% still relevant in 10 years' time, because the requirements will have changed. So this is where opportunities in the executive education, short courses, online space open up, because you can see what skills are in demand, what skills are difficult for employers to recruit from the labour market, and you can start helping them address that with other modes of study.
I think this is really useful insight. It could be used first and foremost to check the understanding by testing that with employers or employer representatives, and then also in terms of really understanding what has been provided by HE and FE, or through HE and FE provision in your area, and is that meeting the needs of employers?
How can this sort of data be used by organisations in your sector to work alongside other stakeholders in other sectors to meet the demand for STEM skills?
By showing that an education provider clearly recognises local employee needs within STEM occupations, and that they have the right courses to train the future workforce, I think they can effectively promote themselves to economic development organisations and higher education institutes, as well as other key stakeholders, as the go-to provider in meeting local and national STEM skills gaps.
So the government's industrial strategy clearly identifies there's a skills gap in STEM, and that's not something that higher education providers will be able to solve by themselves, although they're going to be absolutely crucial to solving that. But they need to be working with local enterprise partnerships, local authorities, the employers in their region. And what this data does, it gives them a common language, a common starting point from which to understand what the problem is, so that they can work out how to address that in concert together. Of course, there are other stakeholders as well, and you look at the Office for Students, and they're very clear. One of their 4 priorities is to improve the graduate outcomes, so in terms of employment for students, and understanding what the demand is critical to being able to meet that priority for the OFS.
I think through taking the insight and data that is within the report, it provides a great opportunity to influence stakeholders. And if you think of a piece of work like the localisation of the industrial strategy, where those stakeholders have to really get to grips in terms of understanding what is required in the local economy and how that demand is going to be met, I think this should provide a really interesting stepping off point to understand what demand there is for STEM skills at a local level. it's absolutely critical that a strong evidence base is used to inform the type of strategic activity that needs to take place, but also the targeted interventions that would take place on the back of the work that's done around the localisation of the industrial strategy.